on Book TV, you can watch them on our website, booktv.org.
Thank you, everybody, and good evening. Boxer Mike Tyson once famously observed that everybody has a game plan until you punch them in the mouth. And that pretty much sums up the reason that Donald Trump inhabits the White House today. Who could have predicted that Mike Tyson would be such a perceptive political theorist, or that Donald Trump would ride that aggressive strategy all the way into the Oval Office? As Trump and his team began the Herculean task of reversing the course of Barack Obama's failed presidency, they faced formidable opponents, not only a vengefully determined left, but a deeply entrenched Republican establishment in Washington, D.C., and a stubborn contingent of never-Trumper politicians and pundits. You already know David Horowitz as the author of too many books to list, all essential reading for understanding and waging war against the radical left. His new book, which happens to be a New York Times bestseller, Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America, lays out a strategy for combating those opponents of the president's restoration of American exceptionalism. Ann Coulter recommends it as a brilliant battle plan, and having read and reviewed it myself for Front Page Mag, I do too. Taking a page from Mike Tyson's playbook, David Horowitz writes, quote, "To turn around the political battles conservatives have been losing for so long, they must begin every confrontation by punching progressives in the mouth. And no Republican leader in recent memory is better suited to that than Donald Trump." Here to talk more about that book tonight is the founder of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, the left's most hated apostate, and the right's most aggressive strategist. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Horowitz.
Thank you. According to the Gallup organization, an incoming president gets on average a 7-month honeymoon. This is one of the sacred political rituals in our country for good reason. It's a ceremonial celebration, acknowledgement, affirmation of the peaceful transition of power, the fact that we are all part of one community. And so you allow your opponent that you've lost to get into the positions of authority, pick his team, and do something before you start criticizing him. Trump, of course, didn't get 7 seconds. As soon as the election was over, the Democratic Party declared war on the president-elect. And this war is as vicious as we have ever seen. Instead of confirmation hearings, we've had a witch hunt. The Democrats actually give a name to what they're doing. I call it resistance. And I actually saw a Democratic operative on Fox say that there's obstructionism and resistance are not the same thing. Because, of course, she didn't actually say this part, but of course, obstruction is what Republicans do. Resistance is what partisans fighting the Nazis do. We didn't say that, but that was the subtext. But there is a difference between resistance and obstruction. Obstruction is you're trying to block a policy that you don't like. Resistance is an existential threat. You don't like the whole system, you don't like the way of life, you want to overthrow it. And Democrats aren't shy about saying that either. I mean, impeachment has been, Trump has been in office 3 weeks or so. They're talking about impeachment. Not that there's anything that he's done that's impeachable, but impeachment is just, we want to get rid of this guy. We are in the midst of a civil war in this country. It's not a fighting war yet. There's a lot of violence coming from the left. And one of my concerns is that this could explode at some point because it's just so long that average Americans are going to take this. But it is a civil war. And that means two completely incompatible worldviews and philosophies are confronting each other. And it's a war that's gone on now for really 30 years, but it's just reached what I would call a boiling point, or reached a point where you can see, as for example, it happens that on this day, Trump gave a press conference, and all of Trump people, I'm getting emails, wasn't that beautiful, and everybody's enjoying it. And on the other side, there's this shock and horror, and it just shows the chasm between the two sides. There was a seminal moment. Let me just say something about the witch hunt. For me, what symbolizes the disgusting nature of what the Democrats have done in the last 2 weeks is the attempted lynching of Jeff Sessions. Senator Sessions has been a friend of mine for 20 years. We've had him at events. He's been a colleague of Schumer's and all these people, the Democratic senators, for 20-odd years. Jeff Sessions is one of a handful of the most decent human beings in the United States Senate. He's also a champion of civil rights. This was an attorney general from the deep South in the era of segregation who prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan, sent a Ku Klux Klan leader to his death, got him the death penalty for the murder of a racial murder, and desegregated the Alabama schools. And yet they portrayed him as a racist. That was their objection to him. This serial character assassin, Elizabeth Warren, dredged up 30-year-old refuted facts. It happened to be there was a civil rights case where Jeff represented black voters who had been disfranchised by the corrupt leaders of the local NAACP. And he defended those blacks, but they're the wrong blacks, so he is portrayed by Elizabeth Warren as a racist. I'm going to come back to the Civil War analogy. No, it's not an analogy, it's an analysis a little later on. But first I want to go to what I considered a seminal moment in the election campaign. It was during the second debate, and Trump turned to the television cameras, to the audience, to the television audience, and he said, "You have to understand, Hillary has tremendous hatred in her heart." And what he was referring to was her remark about the basket of deplorables, which is everybody in this room, everybody who isn't a leftist. And she identified them. Racist, sexist, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes, you name it, is her enemy, is what she hates. And that is every conservative in this country who's been in a political argument with a so-called liberal has been called a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, or an Islamophobe at some point. And that not by Hillary, but by Democrats, by people on the left. They have tremendous hatred in their hearts for us. And the democracy can't really work when you have one side, large political faction, major political party, composed of people who hate people they disagree with. And I will explain this, what the root cause of this is a little a little later. But it comes from something that I've talked about a lot and describe in this book I've written, Big Agenda. In fact, this book is about the Civil War. That's what it's really about, and why Trump is such a unique and important leader for what I will call the patriotic side of this Civil War. People on the left think that they're saving the world or the planet, if they happen to be environmental leftists, saving the planet. Their progressive, if you will, ideology, their leftist ideology, is modeled on Christianity. The world is a fallen place. They don't use terms like fallen, but there's oppression and corruption, but mainly oppression of this group or that group. And they're here to redeem the world. There's going to be a redemption. And if they get enough power, they will redeem the world. In other words, they think of themselves as the army of the saints. And therefore, they think of people who oppose them as the party of the devil. When you listen to so-called liberals or progressives or leftists talking, they talk like hellfire and damnation preachers. Every attack on Trump, or on Republicans generally, and way before Trump, is a moral attack. It's a moral indictment. Republicans talk like accountants. They do. And it's all about budgets and deficits and administrative this, and they're wonks. Whereas people on the left talk like hellfire and damnation preachers all the time. I've often described this as by saying, whenever I see a Republican square off against a Democrat, it reminds me of Godzilla versus Bambi. They call us racist, sexist, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes, deplorables, irredeemable. And Republicans call them liberals. Politics is all about emotions. Who's going to win that argument? What is so unique about Trump, of course, is his bluntness, his refusal to be intimidated by political correctness, the fact that he is not polite. I mean, I'm sure in private he's a very gracious individual, but in a political brawl, he's a brawler. And the other side isn't prepared for Republican brawlers. You name me one Republican you can think of who in front of 50 million people would look Hillary Clinton in the eye and say, "You're a crook and a liar." When she is both. That's just the truth. She is both. There is none. Republicans are too damn polite. Conservatives, I mean, I know there's a distinction, but they all share the same temperament. Very polite. Don't want to embarrass your enemy, is their modus operandi. And we all regard political correctness as kind of ridiculous. We look at people, how can people think this way? But this is not a good way to look at political correctness. It's actually very sinister. The term political correctness was coined by Mao Zedong, the greatest mass murderer in human history. And what he meant by political correctness was towing the party line, the Communist Party line. You may have noticed that people on the left, progressives, the Democrats, they march in lockstep. It's amazing. A tape is surfaced in the Washington Post of Billy Bush and Donald Trump talking what they thought was in private, doing their man boasts. And if you remember, Trump famously or infamously said that when you're a star in Hollywood, they let you grab their genitals. A stupid remark. And of course, it was completely translated by the left into that's what I do, rather than, that's what I would like to do, but I'm too civilized to do it, perhaps. I don't know Trump personally. But okay, this was a private conversation from 11 years previously, and one Republican after another was horrified. This is a bridge too far. I can't support this candidate. This is a bridge too far. And Jeb Bush actually embarrassingly said, I have two precious granddaughters, and there's nothing that Donald Trump could say that could ever apologize for a remark he made in private to Billy Bush in a bus where they didn't realize they were being... That's Republicans. Now, Hillary Clinton, let's see, she sold off her position as Secretary of State, our national assets, and paid $100 million or whatever for herself and her husband. She lied to the FBI. She lied to the American people. She put our highest level secrets on a private server, which violated her oath of office, violated the Espionage Act, opened our secrets to our enemies from China and North Korea to Iran, of course the Russians, who now the Democrats profess to find horrific. She lied about Benghazi. She lied to the mother of a fallen hero of Benghazi. Not one Democrat elected official said, this is a bridge too far. I can't support this candidate. Not one. I brought this up in discussing the Communist Party because that's the way the Communist Party was really effective in political warfare. Everybody in lockstep. And that's the way the left behaves today. Political correctness is like a zipper with a lock on it over everybody's lips. You just don't say things. You don't say to a woman, you're a liar and a crook, who is a former first lady, a former senator, a secretary of state. You would do it to a male, but women are a protected species. All this baloney about being strong. They're strong women. Elizabeth Warren, character assassinating a decent human being who's been 40 years in public life, a dedicated public servant, a champion of civil rights, calling him a racist, reading a letter that was in essence repudiated by Coretta Scott King, violating the Senate rules, and when McConnell says you can't say that, they're silencing another woman. That is a double standard. That cripples conservatives. It cripples anybody opposing this nonsense. You just can't say it. It's politically incorrect. It's not. Intellectually, you look at it, it's ridiculous and is laughable. But in political practice, it's very sinister. And Trump is a liberating force. When I have waited 30 years for somebody on the right to appear like Donald Trump. And why? Well, because it's coming out of the left and being used to fighting, understanding that the left sees politics as war conducted by other means. That's the way they see it. That's the way they fight it. The Democrats' weapon is what? It's character assassination. It's name-calling. It's hate. It's a party of hate. And you see it every election season. And there's no limit to what they will invent to throw at Republicans, to defame them, to destroy them. And as I say, it's always for me Godzilla versus Bambi, so I waited. And then comes the first primary debate. There's Donald Trump, and he's got the highest percentage, so he gets the first question. This is a guy who's never been in a political debate like that, and he's up against, what did they let 12 of them, 12 of the most qualified, most experienced Republican politicians. And the first question out of the box in front of whatever it was, I don't remember the figures, 30 million, 20 million, whatever it was, people. And Megyn Kelly says, this is the first question. You referred to women as fat slobs and pigs. And he doesn't hesitate a second. He said, oh, that was just Rosie O'Donnell. And I said, this is a guy who's an instinctive fighter. This is somebody we want. So now to the Civil War we're in. You have to understand, I mean, this Civil War has been going on. It really of course, the 60s is the crucible of the left, but it's been going on since really the 70s, when the left began accumulating power in our school system, which is now a completely leftist school system. It's not schools in a democracy are there to teach students how to think, not tell them what to think. You know, authoritarian and totalitarian societies, the schools tell you what the orthodoxy is, what to think. Our school system is now, if you want to call it authoritarian, totalitarian, whatever you like. It's a complete one-party state, and teachers abuse every day their privilege as teachers by indoctrinating students. And this began in a serious way in the 1970s. This has continued to today. And what is this war about? Well, the left has a vision. It's called identity politics. Identity politics is a very sinister philosophical attitude. It's racist. It's completely anti-American. And why do I say that? Well, let's take one of the politically correct terms of identity politics. People of color. That always bothered me. I always hated that phrase. Why? Because it's not English. You don't say, oh, here's a box of crayons of color. It's French. That's the way French people talk. It's completely ungrammatical. Of course, you can't say colored people because that's politically incorrect. But people of color, that's okay. So it's laughable, but it's really not. Think about it. If you look at Mexico, it's composed of two main ethnic groups. The descendants of the conquistadors who slaughtered the indigenous Indians, and the descendants of the indigenous Indians. But when they crossed the border into the United States, they're both people of color, therefore deserving of certain sensitivities, certain allowances, certain privileges. Maharajas in India are people of color. Beheaders and Islamic terrorists in Syria and Iraq are people of color. Everybody in the world is a people of color except white people. They're the oppressors. They're evil. It's racist. This is the purest form of racism. And of course it comes out, black people can't be racist. An academic idea that's widespread if you subject yourself to watching leftists on television tell you that. Only white people can be racist. Only white people have power. You have to be blind to think that that's the case. What the left seeks is to establish a racial, gender, sexual orientation hierarchy of privilege, so that if you're the right color, which is dark, you go to the head of the line for admissions to a college, you go to the head of the line for a job, and for innumerable other things in our society. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act outlawed racial categories in laws and institutions. And the Democrats and the left have spent 50 years putting them back. And so they're everywhere and they're ubiquitous. So the Democratic Party is now about to make, as the DNC chair, or the leading candidate for DNC chair, is a Louis Farrakhan, anti-Semitic, anti-American, anti-white racist named Keith Ellison, a protege of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what the Democratic Party has become. Don't make any mistake about the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party's candidate for president would have been Bernie Sanders, a lifelong supporter of communist causes who chose to be married in Moscow during the Cold War, in the totalitarian empire. Except that the crooked Clintons fixed the primaries with the help of Donna Brazile and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That's the only reason Bernie wasn't the candidate. That's who the Democratic Party is. It's a racist party, and it's a party of hate. And along came Donald Trump. And his two chief aides happen to be two of my friends, Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, great Americans. And the three of them put together this inaugural address, which is a confrontation. It's the first time a confrontation with this racist left, the one that the identity politics racist left. Remember the inaugural. Trump said, if we are loyal to our country, we will be loyal to each other. If you have opened your heart to patriotism, there will be no room for prejudice. We are black and brown and white, but we bleed patriot red. The American idea is the antithesis of identity politics, which is now the ideology in all our universities and all of our schools. The American idea is the exact opposite. It's that all people are created equal by their Creator and endowed with the same inalienable rights that government can't take away. Everybody is to be judged on their merits, not on their origins, ethnic, racial, or whatever. Genetic, I don't even know how to say gender origin. Genetic, I don't even know how to say gender origin. That's the American idea, that we face each other on our individual merits, and we are accountable as individuals, not as races, not as genders. That's been the tradition. That was the fight of Martin Luther King. That's why the left despises his message, his vision for the future, where we're colorblind, where his children are judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Every progressive in America wants to judge you by the color of your skin. And Donald Trump has posed the antithesis to that, which is why he has won the hearts and minds of the heartland in this country, and that's how he got elected. So, how do we fight them? Well, if somebody is calling you a racist, you can't kind of pussyfoot around it. You can't start saying, well, you know, some of my best friends, and I ain't going to do it. You can't, prove a negative. And you're going to be blown away because politics takes place in seconds. It's like a 9-second soundbite, maybe. And it's completely emotional. I mean, there are lots of wonks in the political arena, but they don't make the difference. It's emotional. The Democrats are all about emotion. They're all about stirring it up with their moral indictments. You have to fight fire with fire. There's a chapter of this book I've written called The Achilles Heel of the Democratic Party. And it is this. It is that the Democrats control every inner city in America of any size, 100%, and they have for 50 to 100 years. Every killing field, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, New Orleans, St. Louis, every failed school system that year in and year out, for 10 years, for 20 years, fails the poor black and Hispanic, mainly black and Hispanic children, but now also Somalis, and there are poor white kids too. So that 40% of the students in those schools never graduate, and 40% who do. And we're talking about spending $20,000. In Washington, D.C., it's $26,000 a child. You have 20 kids, you've got over $500,000. You can give the teacher $100,000 and still have the money for the buildings and the insurance, for crying out tears. This is a national atrocity that Democrats commit year in and year out, and Republicans are too polite to mention. Not just part of the atrocity that's committed in these inner cities. The welfare system, which kicks the men out of the homes, the wage earners, and go around having children all over the inner city and not having any responsibility for them, because if they did, if they were bringing money into the home, if there were a presence, an authority figure, so these kids don't go wild, they lose their welfare benefits. Oh, then here's another great idea. Let's bribe the women to have more children. Yeah, you can have $200 a month, or whatever it is, something like that, for each child that you have. So you can have 6 or 7 kids condemned to lives of poverty and or crime. Then let's make it as difficult as possible for the law-abiding citizens of the inner cities, who are the majority, to own guns. Then let's go even better. Let's catch and release the felons who go around killing people. Dwayne Wade's cousin, a beautiful woman with 4 children, was murdered by 2 felons in Chicago who shouldn't have been on the streets in the first place. And until Donald Trump, there was no Republican who said we need a new deal for black America. We need a new deal. We need a new deal for the inner cities. And I actually had proposed to the Bush administration, to Bush in 2000, what you need to do is have a $100 billion voucher program for inner city kids. And of course, the Democrats, they lie through their teeth. They're going to destroy the public schools. They're destroyed. They're not teaching these kids. How dare you? You're running the schools as a jobs program for the adults for the teacher unions, which is a slush fund. It's the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, teacher unions, at the expense of the kids. And I submitted this proposal, and I said, you have to make it huge. The Bush administration, they didn't buy it. I said it has to be, the tuition has to be equivalent to what they get in the public schools. Republicans have this idea, you do a voucher program, you give them, well, let's make it, they did for D.C., $1,500, so the parents have to raise the rest of it. And the kids who qualify, not only is the school failing to teach them, but it's physically dangerous. Because Republicans think that they're dealing on the other side with rational people, with Democrats who are reasonable, and therefore, if we don't give them a reason to oppose it, if we make the bill really reasonable, it'll pass. No, because the Democrats understand that if you put the power of the person in the hands of the parents and they can seek out any school that will teach their kids, it will destroy the teacher unions and blow up the Democratic political base, which is what this is all about. So I sent emails to my friends, Steve Miller and Steve Bannon, and I guess they took it to Trump. And within 2 weeks, Trump had a $130 billion plan for the inner cities. That's why he is an incredible threat to the Democratic Party. That's why they lynched Betsy DeVos, treated her like garbage. Talk about, abuse of women. This is a woman, why they hate her? Because she dedicated her life to helping inner city minority kids. That's what her life has been dedicated to. And that's why the Democrats hate her. The oppressors of poor children, minorities in this country is the Democratic Party. And Republicans have to untie their tongues and start talking about this. I think that we are on the brink of an amazing future in this political future, a realigning of the parties. Oh, and the obstacle to it is this communist left. They call themselves social justice. There's no difference between social justice as a fantasy that you can only impose by force and it will impoverish everybody. It's no different from socialism or communism. I've been called a relic in the New York Times for using the word communist. They want to forget. Bernie Sanders would like to forget all of his communist commitments and tell people that it's really Denmark that's his model. They're such liars. I lost my train of thought there, but I have political correctness. It's gone. But in any case, we are on the brink, I believe, of a new era, provided nothing happens to Trump. We are in very serious, dark times. You have people openly calling for Trump's assassination. That's my one great fear before he gets to convert enough Republicans. Is he converting Republicans? Well, I've known Sean Spicer for 20 years too. And there was something in Sean from the beginning. I can always tell something about Republicans by how they relate to me. A lot of them will, everybody says, good work, David, and so forth. But Sean actually, when he was the head of the Press Secretaries Association for the House, invited me to one of their meetings to speak. But Sean and Reince, he invited me to address the RNC. But they're the establishment. And look at Sean as a fighter now, as press secretary for Donald Trump. And all those people fight because they know Trump has their back. There is no Republican, again, who, if he got to be president-elect and then selected his White House strategist, and then this disgraceful press corps began defaming his nominee as a white nationalist and an anti-Semite. There's no Republican who wouldn't have thrown Steve Bannon under the bus. None, except for Trump. And I think that's, I don't know, but Trump, had to deal with construction unions, with business rivals, with whoever owns and runs casinos. So he's a fighter. He's a street fighter, which is what you need in this political world. I have these mixed emotions because I'm worried about the future. You look at what happened in Berkeley. When you see these fascists on television defending their fascist ideas and calling you a fascist, and you know that Soros's money is behind it, and you know that Barack Obama is behind this. And in fact, Steve Bannon made a film, which you should all see, called Occupy Unmasked, about this left. It was about Occupy Wall Street, but it's the same thing. Idiot thugs in the street, backed by Obama and Nancy Pelosi, funded by the government unions. Government unions should be outlawed. Franklin Roosevelt thought they should be outlawed. They're a walking conflict of interest, and they're thugs. And if you want, there's so many subjects I could get into. I got to restrict myself here. But I know what I wanted to. What strikes me is when I think of Steve Bannon and Steve Miller and Donald Trump, they're all from the left, like me. They all have the passion. Now, I don't want to say, this is not negative about conservatives, but conservatives are business people. They're creators. They don't want to get into a pissing contest with a skunk. They don't want to limit their clients. They're inclusive, is what business people are. So they're really unfit for this political war. But people who come over from the left, they see politics as war continued by other means, because all of their leftist friends that they left behind, that's the way they see it. So it doesn't surprise me that Trump should be attracted to Miller and Bannon. It surprises me that just a wonderful person, so decent. I love Jeff Sessions. He's just a wonderful man. That he would be attracted to Trump. That's a little miracle, and that is a bright sign for the future. But this, I've always said, I feel like I've been sent as a former radical to teach conservatives bad manners. But don't become like leftists, but 10% more fight will go a long, long way. And I'm just thrilled by what's happened in this past year, to watch the American people really rise up and to blow the press away. I mean, the press is there like the proverbial chickens with their heads cut off, still running around and not realizing that their heads have been cut off. And they have to have, you can imagine what they feel inside when Trump says to them, "Nobody believes you." And they don't know how to stop themselves and find out why and change. Now, one tends to think in terms of apocalypse, and then there are these sudden changes. And maybe rationality will appear suddenly among some people on the other side. I'm sure that it will take another drubbing in 2018 and an even worse one in 2020 to make it happen. My fear is of Republicans going off all in their own directions. I'm worried about the Congress. I'm worried about people who don't understand, people in the Republican leadership who don't understand the political battle. But I'm heartened by ordinary conservatives. I'm heartened by the grassroots. The reason the Democratic Party went to the left is because of a grassroots leftist movements that kept banging away at them. We have the Tea Party, but now we have the Trump Party. And I think the Trumpers are going to do it. That's my hope. That's my hope. And I have to say, it's been a long time since I've been able to have hope, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. We just watched our country run into the ground, and now we have a fighter, and we have fighters, and now we can win. Thank you.
Okay. If we have any questions, I'm going to ask people to line up here on the microphone since we're being taped. Lonnie gets the first question.
Hey, thank you, David. How did liberals who once had a proud tradition of free speech and pluralism get reduced to what we see today?
Well, it's one thing when you're out of power, and it's another when you're in power. It's the left. I think you have to think hard about the fact that the true leader of the Democratic Party is Bernie Sanders. That's the important thing. And if Hillary had been elected, she would be like Obama and Sanders. She would not be like the Hillary Clinton of the Clinton era. She was always an ideologue in the way that Bill never was. Bill's ideology was me. But that made him, corruption is much better than communism. And actually, corruption saved us in this election. It was Hillary's corruption that tripped her up. So I'm trying to remember it. Go back to my youthful radical days. There were the Machiavellians. I was very idealistic. I remember being shocked when I was standing in Berkeley. There was a thing called People's Park where the left had just occupied a lot that was owned by the University of California, and they were going to build dorms there. And the left went and just took it over and started planting things. Left is very good with symbols, so it was all the planted grass and flowers. And then the university called the police on them, and the police came, and it was tear gas, and got pretty violent. And I was standing with Hayden, and it was the late Tom and unlamented Tom Hayden. And he said to me, David, he said, what we have to do, we have to lure middle-class kids to where they'll get their heads cracked by the police, and that will radicalize them. I couldn't believe people thought like that, but there are a lot of them in the left. And so once the left gets power, they want to start shutting people up. And why do they want to shut them up? Because they're a religious movement. And go back to what I said. They are the army of the saints. They're redeeming the world. We are the party of the devil. Shut the devil up. And if you saw Tucker interview that idiot woman who's a middle school teacher and organize the Berkeley riot, you can see the mentality right there. I don't remember, actually, people, the 60s left was much more innocent than this one, talking quite like that. I'm sure they were there. She's a fascist. She will kill you. If she gets the power, she'll just kill you. So when they're a minority, they're all for free speech and free expression because that allows them to recruit people and get their ideas over. Once they're the professors, shut you up. Where's Lonnie? I hope that answered your question, Lonnie. Go ahead.
Yes, my question is a little different off track. Can you talk about the devastating impact of Flynn leaving Trump's team Because to me, he was the most important pick of any of his picks for government position because he spoke openly and honestly about the threat of Islam. And to me, that's a devastating blow.
Well, I think
There's no one
he'll
like
continue
him.
to do that. I mean, the chief strategists are Bannon and Miller. I know how they think. So I like General Flynn. We had him at our restoration weekend. I was sorry to see him go. I was sorry to see Monica Crowley go. But I don't think it's a devastating blow. I don't know Mattis and Kelly, but they've been in the battlefield. I think they understand the enemy. I know that Sessions does. We've had what I would call seditious Department of Justice for 8 years. By the way, I mean, that term, people of color, if you wondered, how can the Democrats be so sympathetic to Islamic Nazis? And the answer is they're people of color. Oh, it's only a tiny minority that are terrorists. Well, actually, according to the Pew poll, 43% of Muslims support Al-Qaeda. Let's see, 43%, that's like 650 million people. That's a lot of people. I mean, Lenin's Russia or Stalin's Russia was only about 100 million, just for comparison. We have been run. What would we have said of Franklin Roosevelt if he gave nuclear weapons to Adolf Hitler? But that's what Obama did. We've had an anti-American president who identifies with our enemies and who enables them. And when he thought he could get away with it, I mean, after all, we have a political system, there are forces, Jews are pretty important in the Democratic Party. So the way he treated Israel was, we'll give them the military and we'll isolate them politically and cut them off at the knees politically. And when he was leaving, here's $200 million for these Palestinian racist terrorists. That's Obama. So we survived that. And then you had a Justice Department that was supporting this kind of crap. So I don't think that if the departure of one man is devastating, besides Trump, is devastating, we're in really bad shape. So I hope General Flynn will write, and I hope he will speak. And, we'll host him if he does. And I hope he gets some revenge here. Because what we have is we have treasonous elements in the State Department and in the intelligence services. This guy Brennan was bad news, undermining Trump. And, of course, in the judicial system. Now, let's not forget, when you have Harvard and Yale and all these Ivy League schools and all these schools training leftists, the left isn't stupid. They go into the intelligence services. State Department's always been left, so they're serving the State Department. It's a big problem. It runs throughout what they call the deep state.
We're going to take the final two questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I read an article yesterday, I think it might have been in the Washington Post, and the journalist was confronting Trump about his not taking the hard questions that Obama took all throughout his administration from the major news media. I think you just got your answer. Yeah, and so the question then is, that was obviously a very humorous article. It wasn't intended to be, but I couldn't help but thinking, but why should Trump take questions from hostile media when there are other media outlets that aren't being insulting and hostile?
I think Trump is capable of being very fair-minded, and he shouldn't let the liars in the press and the people that are gunning for him answer questions. This is not an attack on the Fourth Estate. It's an attack on liars. You know, there are honest journalists. There are honest people on the left. I would name them, but if it goes out on C-SPAN, that would be bad for them. So I won't. But I'll name one. I mean, you know, Juan Williams is a friend of mine. I had him on a panel over 20 years ago. And he's a good person. And he's got a son who's a Republican. So you know he's a person of real character. It's not easy to have your kid be on the opposite camp. And he got himself fired by NPR, so that's also good. I don't agree with almost anything he says now, but he'll be fair-minded. I would let Juan Williams ask me a question.
So do you think there's any hope that he might train these?
I wouldn't let Judith Miller, whom I detest. Judith Miller, I mean, is so partisan. I mean, it's just so easy to tell. And who was saying that today on, it was Neil Cavuto. It's easy to tell. Here are these amazingly positive things that have come out of the Trump administration. Before he's even president, he's got a boom going, economic boom, and companies coming in and jobs being created. And we're going to take care of a really serious problem, which is the flood into our country of illegals, among whom are a large number, hundreds of thousands of criminals who prey on Americans. And Trump is when in the history of this country has a president come in and the first thing he does is he gets up at 5:30 in the morning every day, goes to bed at 12, and in between fulfills his campaign promises. How does that happen? So if you have a journalist who recognizes and reports the good things and then has critical things, okay, you may not agree with it, but it's fair-minded and they should get questions. The others he should just kick out of the press room. I don't care. I mean, why should we have respect for an institution like the New York Times, which has been, I mean, it was once a great institution. Who would read it now?
Yes, David.
Or the Washington Post, another one. Go ahead.
Yes, incomprehensibly, the left is in and cool and hip. How do we paint them as just the pathetic losers they are and make them uncool to women especially?
I don't know. Have you watched Milo Yiannopoulos on YouTube? And this is, I had that little lapse in my speech, but I remembered what I wanted to say about political correctness and how it works in a sinister fashion to just close people's minds. Steve Harvey, everybody know who Steve Harvey is, you know, television personality, huge supporter of Hillary Clinton, African-American, had her on his show. Trump says, I want to do a new deal for black America. As any sensible person who's part of the same American community, Harvey says, okay, I want to see if you will, you know, put your money where your mouth is. I want to test you. So I'm willing to go to Trump Tower and meet with you. And then this moron, Mark Lamont Hill, calls him a mediocre Negro for that. How racist is that? You become an unperson. It's the banishment. It is incredibly effective. Normal people who have normal jobs and normal networks of people where people have different views and some of them will react violently to, you know, when you ring the right bell, are cautious. And political correctness is a way of shutting them up and making them powerless. And the biggest thing conservatives have to do is to stop fearing being called a racist or an Islamophobe or a deplorable. I have so many people on my Twitter feed who call themselves Deplorable Jane, Deplorable Tom. It's fear. You got to get over the fear. begin to take the hits.
Okay, we're going to get two very quick questions.
Very
and then we're
quick
done.
questions. We have a room here, and I think we're all mad. We've had enough of this. What do we do? How do we mobilize ourselves? They're mobilized 365 days a year. We're mobilized just for the elections.
That's
we
true.
need to do something.
They waste a lot of money and a lot of time. When they march, first of all, if people march in the streets without permits, block traffic, I want them to be arrested and put in jail for 6 months to a year.
You're right.
But every time they have these demonstrations and these riots, Trump gets votes. You have to understand, a lot of what they do is completely counterproductive. And I would say there are no quick fixes. Conservatives hate politics, and it's a very rational position to take. It's dirty. It prevents you from doing creative, constructive things. So I understand that. So conservatives are always looking, we want a Supreme Court decision, it's always a quick fix, so I don't have to think about the political war. The political war is long and hard, and it's going to take decades. And I just like to feel that we're winning with each year that goes by. But you have to be prepared for a long struggle.
Last question.
I just want to say thank you to Lee and Fran for inviting me. I'm from Minnesota, and I live in Beverly Hills now. And I'm just so excited to be here because whatever I can do to help mobilize and help the process, I'm really excited about. So I thank you. That's all I want to say.
Hey, thank you all for coming.
David is going to sign books in the back of the room. There's a table in the back of this room, not outside, but in the back. That's where he'll sign copies of the book.